Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is my senior Keystone project, Food and Fictionalization in Juvenal's 11th Satire. I'm Evan Armacost. I'm a BA/MA student in Classical Studies, and this is my actual title slide. This project was directed by James Uden from the Classics department. He is at a conference at NYU, so he's not able to show up, but none of this could have happened without him, so this presentation is his. It's mine, but it's for him. So, when I tell people that I am majoring in classical studies, assuming that they don't just walk away, which they sometimes do, they usually ask, what is classical studies? So I figured that I would define it here so we have an idea of what it is. Classical studies, in brief, is the study of Greco-Roman antiquity, ranging from about 2000 BC to 600 AD. That got cut off a little bit. Classical studies is very broad. It can engage in literature, history, archaeology, topography, a bunch of other things, and my focus within the field is Latin literature. I started taking Latin when I was 11, and I just never stopped. So that's primarily where my interest lies. And so professional projects in the field tend to fall under what we would call literary analysis, looking at what makes a poem a certain way, its political significance, essentially looking at the works themselves and seeing what they tell, what story they tell about their society at large. My particular project is on the satirist Juvenal. He was a poet in the early 2nd century AD. The particular poem that he is writing, that I'll be talking about, was written about AD 120. So this project started when I knew that I wanted to write about food in the Roman Empire, as we'll see. And Professor Uden is the person to go to when you're interested in food and when you're interested in Roman satire. So I wrote to him, and we got started. And he was doing a seminar last semester on Roman satire, so that's where this project began. I wrote a paper for the course and thought that this semester I would expand it into a larger thesis, but he suggested that we change the paper to an article style and send it to the journal Classical World, published by Johns Hopkins University Press, and to see where that would go. And I found out earlier this week that the journal accepted my article, or they would with revisions, so I'm in the process of getting that worked out. So it's good to see that at least some scholars in the field think that I'm not totally crazy. So, as for the project itself, so like I said, this project treats the 11th satire of Juvenal. The Satire 11 is a dinner invitation poem, which has a certain amount of precedent in Roman literature before this period. There are 3 key ingredients to a dinner invitation poem. You need someone who's inviting, a speaker, you need an addressee, and you need food. Food is particularly what I'm interested in, but we should focus on the first 2 components as well. The speaker, we're not actually sure who the speaker is. Up until around the last 50 years ago, everybody assumed that it was the poet Juvenal himself, but that has since become problematic for reasons that I'll talk about later. And so I at least call the speaker as just the speaker. It's a persona. This all began in a scholarly development called persona theory. We do know who the addressee is, however. His name is Persicus, which essentially translates to the Persian guy. And this name is significant in itself because the Romans thought of the Persians as very decadent and extravagant. So you have to wonder why the speaker would be addressing somebody known for maybe not such a good reputation. And so what I'm pursuing in this project, the argument that I'm putting forth, is that as a part of an invitation to dinner, the speaker invites Persicus to a meal that's supposedly humble, and he'll detail the particular courses in the meal that will, according to him at least, further this point. But I argue that, in fact, the speaker describes the food in such ridiculous, high-flown language that he completely undercuts his own argument. And I think that Juvenal, as the poet, is writing this to a particular effect. I think Juvenal knows this. So, let's look at the courses themselves and see what we can find. So this is my favorite slide. I got to look up a bunch of pictures of baby goats on the internet, which was great. So the first course that the speaker puts forth to Persicus is a hydulus, which is a baby goat. This in itself is interesting because the word haedulus does not exist in Latin literature before Juvenal uses it here. He actually just coins the word in order to describe the course. So that in itself is a bit of a problem. If you have to create a new word to talk about something, maybe it isn't as simple as you're trying to say that it is. So that's step one. That's a first problem. A second problem is the word that immediately follows haedulus, pinguissimus, this adjective, a superlative adjective, which means extremely rich, extremely fat, extremely delicious. And if you're advertising something that you think is going to be simple, you would probably use more simple language, but that's not the case here. The speaker goes on to describe at length how young the goat is. He hasn't even had grass yet, he's too short to reach the branches of the trees, and he has more milk than blood in his veins. This is information that the speaker has no way of knowing, but he puts it forth anyway. And I think that this is all in the wider purpose of describing food that's supposed to be very simple, very humble, in ridiculous, highfalutin language in order to undercut the speaker's point. I don't think the speaker is doing this on purpose necessarily, but I think Juvenal, writing the speaker as a character, I think he knows what he's doing. Moving on to the next course, we have a couple of things. We have eggs with their mothers. Maybe it's just because I'm vegetarian, but I think that's kind of gross. And it's not just me. There's a precedent for this in Roman literature. An author named Martial described a similar course in his own sort of dinner invitation that has a bit of an unsavory feel to it. I can't get into the details now, but it's not really an appealing thing to a Roman audience, and I think that Juvenal knew that. There are grapes as part of the dessert. Grapes feature heavily in a particular episode from the Metamorphoses of Ovid, where Jupiter and Mercury, two Roman gods, visit two shepherd people, essentially, named Baucis and Philemon. Interestingly, the two shepherd people deliver the same sort of menu to the gods that Juvenal's speaker is describing here. And I think that this is significant for the reason that, again, if you're setting a menu that you're putting forth to somebody else in comparison to food that you would offer to gods, and Baucis and Philemon, the shepherd people, were divinized and turned into immortal trees that would live forever, if you're turning your addressee into a god, essentially, and yourself into somebody whom the gods bless, again, this is starting to seem like a pretty significant meal, not just your average Tuesday dinner. And then more in the dessert process, we have pears and apples. The pears in particular come from Signia, a place in Italy, and also Syria, which is rather far for somebody to get their food, and particularly flies in the face of Juvenal's claim that everything is going to be homegrown. So already we have a contradiction. The apples in particular rival apples from Picenum, another Italian town, which the author Horace says is known for its apples. They give the best apples. That's where you would find them. And finally, all of the food is going to be presented in the same basket, which evokes actually the Latin etymology of the word for satire, which is called the lanx satura. It's a full dish, essentially, of fruits and other things. So I think that the speaker is, in fact, drawing attention to his own genre and making a fool of himself, essentially, by revealing the contradictions present in his own menu. So finally, by the end of Satire 11, the speaker rather rudely draws attention to Persicus' own problems, saying, listen, I know you have a lot of stuff going on. I know you're probably in a lot of debt. Your wife's cheating on you. None of your friends really like you. So come over to my house and I will buy my meal, show you how a real Roman lives. But this is a problem because in articulating his own menu, the speaker completely undercuts the point that he's trying to make. He coins new words, he completely contradicts himself, and I think that Juvenal, as the writer of the poem, I think he can't be the speaker because he sets up a character that's so flawed and just generally incompetent that I think we have to picture Juvenal and the speaker as two different entities. So finally, the speaker at the beginning of his invitation, he says, let's test whether I'm right. Essentially, I'll put forth my menu, and you can tell me if it's humble or not. For me, at least, and for the editors who agree with me, I suppose, he fails. This is score 1 for Juvenal, but for his speaker, not so much. Thank you very much.